Howdy folks, welcome back to the Spongebob Season 1 review / retrospective. Today we're going to be talking about episode 4, which contains Naughty Nautical Neighbors and Boating School. Both of these episodes are very solid. Not a whole lot to say bad about any of them. Season 1, you have to understand, if you haven't seen Season 1 of Spongebob Squarepants, it holds up incredibly well. It doesn't do a whole lot wrong. Season 1 of this series is consistently good. It's consistently solid throughout each episode. There are some weaker episodes, but they're still good episodes. There's not a whole lot to say. As far as which one of these two is stronger, I will get into that after I've talked about each part briefly. So you've got 4A, which is Naughty Nautical Neighbors, and 4B, which is Boating School. So we'll talk about 4A first, as it's first in the order. Naughty Nautical Neighbors. Now, this is one that has definitely stood out to me. This is another SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward in the middle episode. Squidward gets caught up in SpongeBob and Patrick's hijinks, which are fairly innocent. They're just blowing bubbles, talking to each other, but it's annoying Squidward, who has I believe, a day off, clearly, and just wants to relax, and these two are making noise and being annoying. So, hence the term Naughty Nautical Neighbors. And the whole theme of the episode is the shenanigans between the three, because Squidward tries to get between them and ruin their friendship for his own entertainment, which kind of makes Squidward look like a jerk, but it's still funny, at least to me. And then he befriends one, and then his friendship with one doesn't work out, so the other tries to step in, but their hatred of each other ends up driving Squidward insane, and he needs to get them back together in the end, and he does, but he ends up getting screwed over and losing his house in the process. So, it's pretty bog standard as far as a Squidward in the middle episode. I think that's what I'm going to start calling these, is Squidward in the middle episodes. It's pretty bog standard. They don't leave the neighborhood at any point. They don't leave. In fact, it takes place primarily at Squidward's house. They don't really leave Squidward's house all that much, which is pretty interesting. You see Squidward as being this multi-dimensional character who can't stand SpongeBob and Patrick, but at the same time, he really can't live without them. You know, if things aren't going the right way, then it's up to him to fix it, and he begrudgingly has to fix it, and in the end, it ends up doing him no favors. And this is a trope that he runs into multiple times throughout the series. I think in more recent seasons of SpongeBob, they've gotten away from the Squidward in the middle trope, because I think they feel like it's probably been overdone, but in these earlier episodes of earlier seasons, it's been done really well. It's been done extraordinarily well, and they start expanding it, I think, outside of the neighborhood. You know, they start taking it to further locations, but I'll talk about that if I ever do other seasons. But it's a standout episode. This episode uses a lot of slapstick, which is why I think I'm a huge fan of it, because I'm a Three Stooges fan, and I like whenever cartoons embrace their cartoony nature and they get more slapsticky, and I feel like this is a SpongeBob episode that relies heavily on that. You know, you've got the scene where SpongeBob is slamming his door in frustration, and then Patrick slams his rock on his head, and it does that whole cartoon accordion effect, which I think is hilarious. You know, it never gets old for me. Just a lot of funny, just small instances of slapstick and just general mayhem and destruction. Not as much as you might see in later seasons, but enough for the first season to really solidify it as a funny episode. A lot of the episode's humor comes from the slapstick and the way those situations play out. So, there's a lot of really funny gags in this. There's SpongeBob attempting to play the bassinet. There's Squidward using the paste of his flan to make bubbles to basically interrupt SpongeBob and Patrick's conversation and say bad things to each other. There's Patrick falling asleep as soon as Squidward starts performing, Squidward trying to drag him out and throwing his back out, SpongeBob having to save him, Squidward's house getting destroyed because he gives SpongeBob and Patrick a bunch of carbonated water, or as they call it, soda water, I guess, and they both inflate like crazy, start laughing, and the bubbles expand and destroy his house. It's really just a solid, just fun episode, and it shows the strength of SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, how they can overcome adversity to just stay friends, you know, throughout the midst of all that. You know, there's not too many times we see SpongeBob and Patrick get angry at each other. It is a theme that is brought back a few times, but The earlier seasons and episodes where it was done, I think it was done really well, and it was always resolved fairly quickly so that kids didn't think you should stay mad at your friends forever, you know? It definitely tied into a good lesson of you really need to love your friends when you can, you know, not let small disagreements keep you apart. So I think there's a good underlying moral beneath all of this comedy, which I think is really, really good. So overall, it is definitely, for me, it's a 9 out of 10 episode. It's very well rounded. There's just not a lot to say about it because it's very simplistic in its plot. Moving on to 4B, which is boating school. This is the introduction of a long-running trope in SpongeBob, which is him attempting to get his boating license, which is the Bikini Bottom equivalent of getting a driver's license. So, SpongeBob has failed his driving test at least 38 times at this point because every time he gets behind the wheel, he just panics and decides to floor it. We get introduced to Mrs. Puff, another new character introduction in the season, who becomes a series regular. And she's another character where they've used her infrequently in the boating school episodes that follow this one, but now they're starting to use her a lot more. They've actually paired her up with Mr. Krabs as a love interest, which is pretty interesting, and it actually works fairly well, in my opinion. So she gets introduced here, and her character is very much just sort of a stereotypical sort of school teacher slash instructor. She's given She's given more of a teacher, like a school teacher like character, as opposed to a boating school instructor type character. She plays more of the role of a school teacher, and the classroom is set up more like a traditional school classroom. Which we don't really get to see in the boating school episode, but we see in subsequent episodes. We actually will see her again in this season, in one of the best episodes of the entire season, Hall Monitor. I don't remember which episode that is, but it is a great episode, and we'll talk about it when we get there. Believe you me, I love that episode. That's one of the most iconic episodes of SpongeBob, for sure. But she's introduced here, and she's got a really good character. She's just kind of over everything. She's just kind of annoyed, and but she also shows a lighthearted side when SpongeBob is doing really good. The whole idea is that Patrick puts a radio in his head and is giving him the instructions so he can complete his tests, and Mrs. Puff makes a remark saying that the only way you could do this would be by cheating, and they laugh about it, and then SpongeBob realizes what he's doing, and he freaks out, and he fails his test again. Patrick ends up running away, presumably to never be seen for the rest of the episode. It's just funny. It's funny the way that things take place. There's a lot of physical humor in this one too, but it's more centered around boating. It's a fun establishment of the fact that SpongeBob just cannot drive to save his life. Although there have been a few instances where, throughout the series and even in the movie, which I wouldn't consider the movie any sort of canon if you can consider SpongeBob being the type of show that has canon, SpongeBob has shown an ability when push comes to shove to be able to drive. It's just usually not a boat, it's some other type of vehicle. So, for whatever reason, when he gets behind the wheel of a boat, he just freaks out and doesn't do well. And I can kind of relate to that too. Driving is simple in some regards, but when you're in high-density traffic areas, driving can be really difficult. I've had a lot of instances where I've mistimed and misjudged things that could have ended really badly, so I completely understand. Driving is not a simple task in a high-density area. If you're in a small town, driving is no big deal. If you're in a suburb of a city and more active big towns where there's lots of traffic flow, then it can be very difficult, and you really got to take your time and pay attention to what you're doing. You can't afford to really take it easy when you're driving. You can't afford to really relax. You got to be on alert. You should always be on alert when you're behind the wheel anyway, but I can completely understand, SpongeBob's apprehension. There have been days where I just don't want to drive because the traffic density and because of the risk of something going wrong, and I don't want to ruin somebody's life or end somebody's life, just behind the wheel of a car. That's definitely nerve-wracking to me, but yeah, it's a solid episode. It's a solid establishment of something that SpongeBob has to deal with on the regular. As far as I know, he never gets his license. I mean, it's given to him temporarily in a season 2, season 3 episode. I can't remember what it's called, but as far as I know, throughout the duration of the series, he never permanently gets it. It's always a point, and I think that's the reason. The reason they do that is so that they have stuff for Mrs. Puff to do. Although in recent seasons, I don't know, because they've been using Mrs. Puff as a vehicle for a relationship with Mr. Krabs, so there's a good chance that he could actually get it before the series actually ends. But I don't really know how they'll handle that, or if they'll do that, or if they'll just leave it a running trope. But SpongeBob also they introduced SpongeBob's unicycle, which we haven't seen in recent seasons for whatever reason, but it's his bike, he calls it, but it's really just a tall, goofy unicycle, very in character for SpongeBob, and that's what he uses to get around. It's actually a little neat thing because it's got paddles because it's in the water instead of actual wheels, even though the boats have wheels. I don't get it, but it's just fun because we've seen bikes before. I think our first introduction to a bicycle was in Jellyfishing with Squidward, that showed how bicycles work. So SpongeBob's bike is just a unicycle, and we don't really see it again other than this episode and I think one other or two others, and that's pretty much it. We just see him walking everywhere he goes, which I guess works out for him. But overall, both of these are very solid episodes. If I had to give one strength over the other, I would say Naughty Nautical Neighbors is definitely a much more engaging episode than Boating School, but not by much, not by a whole lot. I think it's just got enough slapstick to keep me wanting to continue to watch it, whereas Boating School, in some areas, it just kind of, like, there's a scene where SpongeBob is just moping, and, you know, Patrick tries to cheer him up with the walkie-talkie, and that whole scene is kind of slow and fun, but it just kind of, I don't know, it's a weird pacing thing. It's sort of a little bit of filler for the episode, where there's really nothing for SpongeBob to do after he's failed his boating test. They don't jump right into the next one. They're just establishing, okay, here's what he needs to do to try and succeed. But in that downtime, they just do a fun little gag with Patrick Squarepants. And it's not that it doesn't work. I think it just slows the episode down a little bit for my tastes. But it's not a bad episode. I love both of these episodes pretty much equally. It is a shame, though, that we don't get to see SpongeBob's unicycle anymore, really. I've just been noticing it. Somebody will have to correct me, because I haven't seen a lot of the more recent seasons. I don't know if they bring back the unicycle or not, but the last I checked, they haven't really done anything with it, you know? They barely used the boating school thing because Mrs. Puff is now a character really outside of that. But that was a really cool part of world building of Bikini Bottom there with boating school. And you could probably, if you wanted to, you could give boating school more marks for just building the world of Bikini Bottom even further. You know, establishing that there are more things to go or more places to do. Oh my gosh. More places to go, more things to do. There it is. I'm all twisted today. More places to go, more things to do than just SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward's house and the Krusty Krab. You know, there are more places. Obviously, there's Krab's house, but we're adding another location, and Jellyfish Fields. You know, we keep adding locations and things to do. And the series has been very good at building Bikini Bottom as a society and not just leaving it as generic. You know, for a couple of seasons here, it's like you see them downtown a bit, but it's not all that common to see them going downtown. It's become more common in more recent series, but especially in season 1, it's not terribly frequent. I mean, in Hall Monitor it is, and we'll get to Hall Monitor when the time comes. But you know, we've got Goo Lagoon, we've got Jellyfish Fields, we've got Mrs. Puff's boating school, we've got the Krusty Krab, which was established in episode 1, and then we've got Con Street, which is SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward's residence, and then we've got Anchor Way, which is Mr. Krabs' neighborhood. He seems to be the only one on his block. That stays consistent throughout the series. You know, so as the series has gone on, we've diversified our locations, which is really cool. Bikini Bottom feels like a real town. It's structured like a real, actual town, and I think that's cool, you know? So, overall, solid episode. Is it my favorite of Season 1? No, it's hard to say. Once I'm done with Season 1 with this retrospective, I'll have to look at what I think my ultimate favorite episode is, but this is definitely a solid one, and it rounds off the season pretty well. And again, we get established to a new location and a new trope, which is good. it's definitely, if I'm watching through season one, I'm not going to skip over these episodes at all. I'll watch them through. I think I'm more likely to skip some of the later episodes going on. I'm just struggling to remember what comes in what order. You know, we're starting to see a lot of tropes, and now that we've got most of the tropes established for the series up to this point, I think the episodes we're going to start seeing the recurring tropes more. Like now we're starting to see, with Naughty Nautical Neighbors, we're seeing more Squidward in the middle, where we had already seen it at least, what is it, twice before now. We saw it once with jellyfishing and again with bubble stand, or first with bubble stand and then with jellyfishing. I think that's the way it went. So this is our third Squidward in the middle trope episode, and our first boating school episode, which is aptly titled. So pretty soon we'll be getting into things like Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. We'll be getting back to Plankton trying to steal the secret formula for the Krabby Patty, although his next scheme actually isn't that, which I think is really interesting, that the series moves away from that fairly quickly and then it goes back to him trying to steal the formula. So anyways, let me know what you guys think of these episodes. Those are sort of my thoughts and feelings. Overall, very solid. Nothing really bad to say, except for boating school. I think the pace slows down a little bit for one sequence, but it's fine. It picks right back up again. There's really nothing to complain about. I think the animation's solid. The voice acting is tremendous. It's just standard season 1 stuff. So let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa with another Spongebob Squarepants Season 1 review/retrospective, and I will see you guys next time. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.